All right, Guru Nation, the news just keeps rolling out. So today the FDA came out with a Section 804, which is an important ruling. It might reshape long-term R&D spending in the US. It's designed to lower drug pricing, which is a response to Trump's most favored nation executive order to lower drug pricing. Um, Today, May 21st, I'm recording this today, and I'll get Darshan on and have his opinion on this because he's a pharmacist as well as an attorney. But on May 21st, 2025, of course, hello, watching in the future, listening in the future. The FDA Green Lit state and tribe-led importation, so Native American tribes, can import select Canadian prescription drugs under Section 804 of the FD&C Act, aiming to temper U.S. drug prices. Currently, about 2.78 times of those peer OECD nations. While sites don't purchase the IP themselves, anyone that runs a site knows we don't, thank God we don't have to buy the IP, unlike some investigator-initiated trials, which we'll cover just a little bit here. Sponsors' revenue forecasts for marketed drugs could shift, and this could obviously influence how they allocate R&D budgets. My mind, when I read this, immediately went to it would make sense to have a lot more Canadian sites now involved in research. They've been around. I mean, there's a lot of Canadians watching. It's the second biggest market after US, of course. And then I believe India is right after. So thank you to Guru Nation in the US, Canada, and India. I think United Kingdom's fourth. So this was greenlit today. Now, just to show how we got here, right? In the early 1990s, it cost on average to get a single drug through R&D, not necessarily get approved because most don't get approved, but just through the phase 3 studies. And I guess you can throw in the post-marketing requirements that sometimes the FDA makes them do, which they don't necessarily hold them to it, especially in oncology trials, which I think that's going to change now with Prasad running the CBER, but that's different topic for another day. I'm still in the middle. I'm halfway through with that book, so I'll give you my thoughts on that. From the mid 90s, it cost roughly $250,000 to get a drug through the clinical trial process. Today, that average is 2.23 billion, which is up from 2.12 billion just a year ago. Now, in 2024, the top 20 pharma R&D budgets ranged from over 10 million, where you have Merck and them at 17, J&J at 17, to 5 to 10 billion for others. So the top 20 pharma budgets, R&D budgets are around $10 billion a year, all right? A year. Now, to get a drug through the entire clinical trial process is a 7-year endeavor, sometimes 10. But the trend is these costs are rising and they're rising fast. A lot of regulations have increased since the mid 90s till today, causing some of these rises. But a lot of it is honestly bloatware, middlemen, people seeing inefficiencies and making money off of it. I've covered it on my channel. I've had guests on. There's a lot of pressure now. There's downward pressure on pricing, especially now with the executive orders. Despite these rising costs, Pharma's projected R&D return on investment is about 5.9%, which is up from 4.1%. So basically, Pharma's return after spending all these billions every year, 2.23 billion to get a drug through the trial process, their return on investment is 5.9. They could do better just putting that money in the S&P 500. I mean, that's the S&P can get you anywhere from 5 to 9 on average. So, what is the revenue pressure and the R&D implications? This is why you guys are watching and listening. Broad importation could force list price reduction or heavier rebates. And this is separate from the most favored nation, what Trump was discussing. This is just a different lever to get drug prices down. This administration is very aggressive at making this happen, right? The executive order requires congressional approval. What the FDA did today, I don't believe does. I think they greenlit it. Now, the executive order has a lot more power and weight behind it than this seems like a small percentage of the overall aggregate, and it still remains to be seen how the states are going to be able to sell. I maybe online pharmacies like Hims are going to really take off. I don't know. A lot of pharma are doing direct to consumer now. I'm not sure. That's probably a whole nother industry that's going to develop around that. But R&D, especially with the flagship drugs, so like all the GLPs and stuff, I think those are going to be prioritized. And 14% of revenue for big pharma, the R&D intensity is 14% of the revenue for the average big pharma is R&D. So this may further squeeze and may compel cuts to some early stage programs. Sponsors could reallocate funds towards higher value assets like oncology, GLP, although Prasad, when it comes to oncology, again, I don't think it's gonna be that simple. He's not okay with just surrogate endpoints. He wants real overall survival, proof of overall survival or quality of life. Unless it truly is in a space within oncology where there is an unmet need. That's, we got to get to that book later. There's a lot to discuss. So, maybe geographic shifts. Like I said, when I read this headline, my mind instantly went first to Canada. Will there be more sites in Canada now because of this? So with the US price erosion, with or without the executive order, right? The seems like the trend, the focus, the push, the impetus is to get drug costs lower in the United States. Pharma may shift their discovery and early development to lower cost regions. There's a less than zero chance that, or sorry, there's a greater than zero chance that biotech and innovation as we know it, whether we like it or not, this might indirectly make China the new center for R&D, even though their reputation is being a little lax with the intellectual property, not just in life sciences, but in all industries. But it seems like they do play ball when they have to, the right way. Although there's always that area of uncertainty when it comes to how safe is your IP. They've caught up to the United States. I wish I could show you a chart. I should have actually had the chart, but maybe I'll have a link to the chart underneath. China has caught up to the US in terms of how many study participants they've enrolled in trial. They used to be behind, now they're caught up. Head to head, they might even surpass us pretty soon. So I don't know if the US could lose its status as the favored R&D hub. I don't know if sponsors, biotechs are going to be comfortable doing business in China or with China because it's not just doing business in China, it's doing business with China when you're doing that. Reduced onshore spending may stall planned facility expansions. I don't think Lilly's slowing down theirs at all, but Lilly's got a great direct to consumer strategy. Lilly's one of the ones that's ahead of the curve, and maybe that's the new model, but that requires a lot of capital expenditures, which we can get into on another day. There's actually more to discuss in regards to that. But the upside scenario, so there's some upside to this. Under pressure, sponsors can double down on AI-driven trial design. And by the way, I don't think these two things are mutually exclusive or these two pathways. I do think there's a world where all of these things kind of happen at once. So AI is already a trend, right? But sponsors can double down now on AI-driven trial design, decentralized models and predictive biomarkers that are predictive biomarkers when it comes to, for example, I'm already seeing some sponsors doing this. They're developing their own biomarkers, their own algorithms to pre-screen patients and to it essentially lowers the per asset cost of drug discovery, but also during the clinical development when it comes to pre-screening patients and accelerating timelines. Efforts already boosting success rates to 10.8% in 2023. This is on the drug development side prior to clinical trials. So on the preclinical side, the drug discovery side, there could be onshore investment counterweights. So the tariff threat response, companies like Novartis and Roche, which are not US based companies, but they do have US manufacturing. They pledged 23 billion and 50 billion respectively. So 23 billion for Novartis, 50 billion for Roche. Over the next 5 years, this suggests that import driven price debates can catalyze domestic reinvestment. This is what Trump and his team would want. This is the extreme bull case of what they would want. They would want more manufacturing plants here. They would want greater control over the supply chain here because during COVID, it was evident that we rely on other countries, especially potentially hostile countries like China. We rely on them for too many critical components of our infrastructure, especially when it comes to active pharmaceutical ingredients and things like that. So, from that perspective, it makes sense to push for this, even though the tariff threat is cooling off. The discussions are way more sensible now as opposed to when they first came out. So I do think we're going to have a domestic reinvestment in the United States, and we can give incentives. I'm sure that this administration seems like they'd be willing to give federal grants or tax credits to emerge U.S. R&D competitiveness, offsetting revenue headwinds. So where I stand on this, I do think China becomes more powerful. I don't think biotechs are just rushing over there. I do think they're going over there for their early discovery, perhaps. But with AI being the counterweight to that, you would probably go to China for the early stage trials. But then that doesn't come for free. That comes at a cost, and that cost is usually ownership or shaky patent protection. Uh, in China and but also in the United States. And there could be further regulations that would prevent or make for more friction for that kind of outsourcing. So long-term pros and cons, I think efficiency gains via AI, and I don't like the term decentralized trials. I think that was a failed model. But I think we're going to try to make the sites more efficient. I do think the consolidation of the sites is not going to slow down. I do think once they do consolidate, they can start playing the volume game and prices down. So maybe overall R&D budgets at the site level goes down, but I think we have a runway of about 5 to 10 years until the consolidation actually occurs. Right now, it's only 10% of sites are part of a network. I think that might get to 30, 35. I've written about this on LinkedIn. Onshore investment bolstered by tariff incentives. So Lilly's already doing it here as opposed to abroad. And then you have companies like Novartis and Roche, which have already pledged 23 and 50 billion respectively. And then collaborative funding models. So concentration in high return on investment areas, limiting therapeutic diversity. This would be a con because you would basically look for, and the FDA has come out and said they want to push for rare diseases, orphan diseases. They want to actually go straight to market and just have post-marketing studies. I do think in those cases, though, the post-marketing studies, the phase 4 studies, will be just as stringent as your typical phase 3. So you're just changing the number for the phase, but you're getting the same budget if you're a US site that's worried about that, that does rare disease studies. I think that's just some semantics at play, and it actually reduces risk from the sponsors because they get to monetize while they do R&D. And when it comes to something like rare disease where there is no alternative, the alternative is death or a miserable quality of life. I think safety may take a backseat to humanity, to right to try. I remember a decade ago, right to try was a huge thing. I think that's going to come back big time. Now, AI and data platforms. Everyone and their mama has an AI and data company. Companies are optimizing trial cohorts, endpoints, regulatory filings, all these things are getting centralized. Even at the small site level like my own, these things are getting centralized. Once you consolidate and centralize and streamline, you can have price reductions passed off to the customer. That's the purpose of technology. That's the purpose of reducing inefficiencies. That's why I always say technology is a deflationary force. The purpose of all this stuff is not to drive profits higher. The purpose of all this stuff is ultimately to streamline and provide value to the customer, which in this case for sites and for all the other service providers in our industry are the sponsors. You might see public-private partnerships now. Watch for new biotech incubators co-funded by big pharma and government, sharing risk on novel modalities. I would not be surprised. This FDA administration is very entrepreneurial compared to previous. I know Darshan might disagree with me, but I would have him debate me on the show in regards to that. And then tools for remote monitoring and eco and all that's just going to continue. That's going to maintain productivity, enhance productivity, and be able to squeeze margins. And the thing is, nobody does these things so that, yes, we can charge we'll make less profits later. But it's one of those scenarios where it's winner take most. If you can get somewhere first, streamline and capture more market share and value, you can lower prices to where you make it your competitive advantage that you can do things for less. And that's quite honestly that's how business should be. Um, Now, if you're a pharma exec, you're obviously having this probably every hour Zoom meetings. Balance margin management, sustained early stage investment, venture partnerships and open innovation models become the thing. I think biotech incubators co-funded by big pharma, like I said before, we've already seen Lilly. This is nothing new. I just think you're going to see a lot more of this. Now, if you're an investor, which I also am, I think this is actually good for biotechs. The question is going to be what it does to the merger and acquisition multiples when they do get acquired, but there remains to be seen how the industry pivots with this, whether they go out offshoring more or whether they just build everything in-house, and just outshore what makes sense rather than manufacturing. If you're investing, look for efficiencies. Look for trial efficiencies. Obviously, AI, remote tech, you're already looking for this, but service providers handling complexity, like David LaHaye said it at SOS. The ceiling to growth is layered in complexity. We got to figure out how to get through that complexity. And then for sites, if you're a site, I don't think anything really changes. I mean, be prepared for the possibility that in the next 3 to 5 years, your budgets will take a hit. It's possible. Although there's enough waste in our industry, we talk about it with Save Our Sites every year. There's enough inefficiency and waste at the middleware level, the middleman level between the sponsors and the sites that we might be able to get enough of the cost efficiencies passed off to the sites and the sponsors, and the middlemen may be the ones to take the hit. They're pivoting, they're becoming tech companies also. The middlemen, if you can't figure it out, in my opinion, are the CROs. They've been pivoting even before these executive orders. Get into the site space, get into the tech space, figure out the efficiencies. They've been playing prisoner's dilemma for the longest time. I wrote about it. So I think for sites, it's something to keep an eye on. It's not something to worry about necessarily. Be prepared as always. Let me know what you think. Obviously, this is a breaking situation, so as things stabilize, this will not be the last time we discuss this. This is probably the first of many. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Let me know your thoughts. Bye bye.